Well, she is not Diana Ross, the Motown singer, and she's not Betsy Ross, the maker of the first American flag. But Beverly Ross is going to be speaking to us about grief in particular today. What I think is significant is that Beverly knows grief very personally in the death of her daughter. She and her son, Josh, have actually written a book, and you'll see it up here entitled Scarred Hope that you can purchase if you would like to. And maybe Beverly's greatest claim to fame from our perspective is that her son-in-law, Josh, or her son, Josh, married Casey Rogers, who grew up here at Greenlawn. And so there's a connection there. And so I won't take any more of your time. Beverly, come and speak to us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You know, I feel like we should probably do some announcements before we get started. I do have 4 handouts over here. If you didn't get them, I want you to. One of those is to really take notes on, and I'm going to use it all day. So those things I'm giving to you are not just for this session. I've given you one list, resources, grief resources for children. And those aren't just for grief. Some of those are for anxiety, because the more and more we research grief, the more we find out anxiety and grief are like that. You will not be in grief that you don't flood with anxiety too. And so it's part of the dance of grief to calm anxiety. Lots going on with anxiety in our world right now. Would you agree with that? And then I gave you a list of grief books for adults that I personally think should be in every church library, maybe multiple copies of them, so we can be a good grief resource to give to people. Some of those books are going to contain lots and lots and lots of truths, and some you're going to go, I don't agree with that, but I really love that. And so all those books have got some good nuggets in it. And I've learned to say with grief, maybe more than any topic I've ever dealt with. Well, that's not true. Maybe heaven too. A lot of, I don't know. Are the streets really going to be gold? I don't know. But you know, it's not going to matter to me if they're gold or not. What about you? I mean, you know, it's just kind of some of those, I don't know. We set in the unknown with that. And then I've given you a page that we use constantly, whether a grief group or not, with lots of little stick figures on it. And it's really good for children, but it is really good for adults too. And you can use the exact same figure for multiple feelings. What do you think? When we're not sure what we're feeling, some of those we can say, I'm so overwhelmed. And some of those we can say, I was overwhelmed, but I'm coming up to the surface. Do you hear some of the language that we can engulf around those? And I think that's powerful. And then I've given you one that we use in our grief groups. And it's that ball of physical, emotional, relational, and spiritual. And that is the outline for our day. Now, I want to tell you, when Dewey first called me last April to ask me to come, he asked me to speak on children and grief, which I jumped on immediately. I am the founder and executive director for Wise County Christian Counseling. We're a nonprofit counseling group. We have 12 counselors right now. Half of those are play therapists. I don't say this proudly. I say this with a little, we've got over 200 kids on our wait list right now. Kids have felt extreme anxiety coming out of COVID, trying to figure out school, trying to figure out disruption. Some of our children have had maybe multiple deaths around COVID, and a lot of anger is in our culture, which breeds children's anxiety. Do you agree with that? If anybody says no, I can talk a whole lot more about that one. But then as Dewey and I explored, I said, you know, I really think we've got to add adults in there. Because at Wise County Christian Counseling, we have a sub-ministry called Jenny's Hope. And I'll tell you more about how that got started in a minute. But we have a sub-ministry called Jenny's Hope, and it's a grief center. It's a grief center mostly for children. But we also run an adult group concurrently with children. And that group is not to help, this one group, now I run other grief groups. So what I'm talking about right here is not to deal with adult grief. We run an adult group to help those adults learn to deal with children's grief. Grief by itself is super scary to talk about. It's why a lot of people, when someone dies in their family, they get ignored. Because it's not because people don't care, it's because people don't know what to say. People don't know what to do. And so we just don't do anything. And then after a while of not doing anything, it gets hard to begin to do something if you've gone 3 to 4 months without doing anything. Does that make sense? Okay. And so we run those. So I said, well, Dewey, what do you think about adding the adult concept in there? We're teaching adults how to help children by learning to practice some things themselves. And I said, when you get grief, what I've already said to you, when you get grief, frequently grief and anxiety are like that. So we're always underlaying our grief work with a lot of anxiety work. So whether you're in grief, whether you're in anxiety, whether you've got children in grief, children in anxiety, what we're going to do today is listen to the stuff through both of those lenses. I do know grief. February 2010, a daughter started feeling bad. I was in San Antonio to do a women's event, and she started writing me that she wasn't feeling very well. She went to the doctor on Monday and was diagnosed with the flu. It was epidemic in the DFW area. That's where we live at that time, epidemic there. And so started giving her Tamiflu. Doctor gave her a couple of prescriptions. By Thursday, woke up and Jenny was not feeling well at all. That was Monday, probably about 5, she got diagnosed. Thursday morning, not feeling well. Within just a few hours, what we found out is Jenny never had the flu at all. She had group A strep and had gone without an antibiotic. And our precious 31-year-old daughter was in septic shock. We fought for life for 19 days. They amputated her legs, seizure started, and on February 22nd, we stood around Jenny's bed and told her goodbye. And our belief system would be that the angel swooped in and took Jenny to see the face of Jesus. And we left the hospital to go tell a 9-year-old little girl that her mommy was gone. And so I became obsessed with children in grief, learning about it. What does the research say about it? Who does what? What can we do? What are good things to do? What are things we should avoid? And nothing is really clear. Nobody writes a handbook. Because as we're going to talk about third session, when we get to relationships, there is not one answer about grief that works for everybody. And check this out. Even if it were the right answer for me in this minute, if you spoke it to me an hour later, it may be, oh, that's hard. So we as the ones speaking learn to do lots of body reads and circling back. And that's not what I meant to say. And what did you hear when I said that? We're figuring things out. But we've got to be brave enough to continue to show up. We've got to be brave enough to walk with people, to stand with people when the hard things happen. Are all of you from this church? Are y'all from this church? Where are you from? Canyon, Texas. Where are you from? Sunset.
Down the street.
Okay, I started, but that is Sunset by us. Sunset. Okay, I got you. When I walked in the building, I was struck all over again, seeing the pictures of the 6 girls, because that's when I met y'all. That was Casey's senior year. Casey and Josh started dating the freshman year, and I heard the story. And the first time I came in to speak at the women's group here, Talitha's mother was there, and I spent a lot of that time with her that weekend. It was before I knew grief myself, but listening to her and being with her, and our society is not untouched. Our churches are not untouched. I mean, this isn't the key to this workshop by any means, what I want to share with you. And it's probably going to be the most depressing thing you hear today, but the death rate is 100%. We're all going to die unless the Lord comes back quickly, unless he comes back soon. But it's part of life. And we've got to figure out how to maneuver that and maneuver that well. And I'm learning to speak. When I speak about death, I find myself with my hands open, because I've been praying lately that when my day comes, may my hands be open, and may I not just cling to life and fight death, but may it be peaceful. I heard Terry Rush, a preacher in Tulsa, say his wife died right before COVID hit, probably about the time COVID was hitting. And Terry told me that a day before she died, Mary said, I thought it would be harder than this. I just loved that. I thought it would be harder than this. So for our time today, I do want to figure out some exploring. I figured out, maybe I just wanted to do it like this. Grief to me was one huge ball that was overwhelming, and I kept running into it and it kept rolling over me. So in order to champion it at all, in order to get control of some of the pain, I split it into 4 components, and that's the ball you have written on that page. Every day I'm still, when I get in my car in a few hours, I'm going to be going over, have I taken care of myself physically today? Check my body. Is my jaw loose? What's going on with my shoulders? What's going on with my abs? Just checking me out. How's my breath? Physical. And then I'm going to check myself out emotionally. What are you feeling when you get in the car? What's going on? Relationally. Did you make some new friends today? Did you have some eye contact? What's going on with that? Let me slide this in right there. I've been speaking to some school districts, and I may say this again under relationally, but I believe this next sentence. I don't know where I got it. I don't know who said it. I don't think it originated with me, but man, it bears my heart. It says everybody needs somebody whose eyes light up when they see them. And shouldn't that be us? If we're the Bible school teachers or adults in their world, what we're showing them is what the face of God is going to do when they walk into heaven, or what the face of God is going to do constantly. Everybody needs somebody whose eyes light up. There's one other piece of my story that I want to tell you. COVID hit March 2020. Let's go back. 2018, September, Josh and Casey, our son and daughter-in-law that Dale was telling you about, were on the beach in Florida. And I called Josh to tell him I'd just been diagnosed with cancer. Now that cancer in 2018 is now what we call my baby cancer. It was nothing. I did a little surgery. I did 5 days, twice a day, 10 radiation rounds done in 5 days. Easy, easy, easy. But Josh called me the week later and he said, Mom, you want to write a book with me? Pray about that. And I said, I've already been praying about it. And yes, I do want to write with you. He had already written Scarred Faith, which is right there. It did very well. Also brought reentry. But we wrote Scarred Hope. And it took me, write it 2 years to write it. We did a book launch during COVID. It was coming out, rolling out on Amazon September 1. We were in Austin to do a podcast with Luke Norsworthy. I was in a hotel room 3 minutes before Josh called me to tell me the book had just gone live on Amazon. I found another knot. And I didn't want to tell anybody because I wanted to tell my husband first, and I didn't want to tell him on the phone. And that was not baby cancer anymore. So lots and lots of tests, lots and lots of things going on that fall. I've been through 7 surgeries. I've had a double mastectomy. I've had a major infection during that time. Lots going on with that. So the book, the first sentence of the book is, Josh, I have cancer. And then the chapters yet to be written are another cancer journey filled with anxiety. The first 3 months, while I didn't know what was happening, when I was doing body scans and bone scans and trying to figure out where else I was on an estrogen blocker, and it was an estrogen-fed tumor. So my doctors were just mortified at what on earth could have happened. So this over here in the announcement piece, what I want to do, and I'll talk more about in a minute, these are 24 verses about peace. My grandchildren love these, other children at our church love these, but it's just little flip through verses that I take with me everywhere I go. I carry them in my purse. And I want the word of God to be written on my heart well. Now, one other thing I want to tell you about the books before we do a break, everything at YCCC is on a sliding scale. So those are the prices of the books, Reentry, Scarred Hope, just take what you want. But if you don't have the money to pay that, don't worry about it and just take what you want and figure it out. You know, if you've got $5 a book, that's great. And if you want to pay full amount, that's great too. So let's get going with physical. We've got plenty of time. I'm telling myself we're going to rush here. I do not believe that it is strong or brave to get ushered onto a road of grief. And lots of people will say that to you. You're so strong. If you knew what was going on inside. I saw 3 grief therapists. I know as a therapist myself, you're only supposed to see one at a time. I know that, but I was an overachiever at grief. I didn't want to stay there forever. Little did I know you don't get that choice. It's never going away. You're going to walk with this. And one of my therapists told me, she said, strength is way overrated, Beverly. Give it up. That's not your goal. I do not believe that it is brave or strong to get ushered onto a road of grief. Let me be really clear. What I do believe is so brave, and what I do believe is so strong, is make up your mind you're going to do your grief work. I'm going to do some things here. Every year in November, I host an event called Hope Through the Holidays for people that are going to have an empty chair at their tables. Sometimes the same people come back every year. But I'll never forget the night that we had, always run a stillbirth group. Oh, that's hard work. And the night that we had a daddy who had just buried a baby 2 weeks before, the mom still didn't feel like coming. She saw me in counseling, but she didn't want to come that night. And the daddy came and he put his hand on the door and he turned around and went back to his car. Couldn't walk in the room. But I felt like for him, that was so brave and so strong, just to drive into the parking lot, get out of the car and put his hand on the door. That was the first move for him. Brave and strong to decide, I want to do this. No. Skip what I just said. I'm going to walk this road as healthy as I know how to walk it when there's nothing in me that wants to do this. That makes more sense to me. Does that make more sense to you? That's what I want to say. Nothing in me wants to do this. If I have to walk this road, and I do, I want to do it beside people like you. I want to do it shoulder to shoulder with other people that are speaking into me, blessing me, and helping me. I don't believe that I don't believe the goal is ever to be healed. I don't believe the goal is to get over it. I don't believe the goal is to get through it. I'll be glad when this is gone. The goal, in my opinion, in my really strong opinion, is to develop, let's say, the emotional and the spiritual muscle to learn to carry the pain. Go learn to carry it. It's on us. We don't get a choice about that. There is this fabulous scene in a movie. It's an old movie called The Rabbit Hole. Nicole Kidman, probably one of her first movies. A 4-year-old little boy, her little boy, was killed by a teenage driver. And the movie is about her grief journey, her marriage being put back together, questions she had about grief, her own anger at the teenage boy. And this one scene, it's all I could watch of the movie because there was a professor at ACU that said, you got to watch this scene. It reminds me of you. And I don't know why, but I'm so glad he told me about it. But it's Nicole and her mother in the attic. It's a dark scene. Her mother had already buried a son and her husband, so Nicole's father and brother, and they're putting the baby's toys up. And Nicole's character looks at her mom and says, Mom, does it ever get easier than this? She's just silent. And the mom finally speaks and she's looking off and she says, I don't know if it gets easier, but you learn to carry it. She said, it's like somebody sews a brick in your pocket and you can't get the brick out. But one day you'll wake up and the brick won't be your first thought until you bump into the cabinet and you'll go, oh yeah, the brick, I remember. Or you go to put your hand in the pocket to get a Kleenex out and you're like, oh yeah, the brick. But you will learn to carry it. And I think that's the goal for us with even our children, is to help our children learn to carry it. One thing with children different from us, I'm 12 and a half years out of Jenny's death. And I still think I hear her when I'm in Walmart. I'm in the nail salon and I hear a daughter saying, Mom, just the right tone. And I turn around. But with children, they grieve through every developmental stage. Does that make sense? As they begin to, their brains begin to comprehend permanence. It's a new grief. And then there's a new grief, the Mother's Day of the school project, or Father's Day, or sibling. And then there's Christmas. and then there's prom, and then there's graduations, and then there's weddings, and then there's their babies. But the grief is ongoing for children of grief, and we as the adults need to figure out, how are we going to walk with them? Are we going to let them look at a page like the stick figures and go, no, we're going to tell you how you feel now. This was 12 years ago. Let me tell you how you're going to feel now that you're growing up. No, we sat with them and we figured it out. We listened to them. We're not corrective. They're teaching us. They're spilling their heart to us. They're figuring out what kids, what adults do too, is we put our toe in the water to go, can I trust you with what I really want to say? Can I trust you with what I'm about to tell you? Or we'll talk about this more for session. Are you going to throw a religious cliche at me that means I don't really have time for this? But we do have some religious cliches. You familiar with what I'm talking about? You know, there's a reason for this. She's in a better place. And do I believe Jenny's in a better place? I sure do. I sure do. But that's sure not helpful when what you really want is her to be with you. Somebody said that to Malaya after the funeral, and a sweet little granddaughter said, no, she's not. The best place for my mommy is with me. And I thought that was pretty brave of her. You know, I got it. Yes, that's how she felt. But a religious cliche is not going to be helpful. How can we get down to the bare basics of the physical, of dealing with the physical? Grief is always scary, but particularly when it has to do with children. Dr. Brene Brown says this: every person has a story that will absolutely break your heart. We just have to be brave enough to show up and listen to each other's stories, huh? That's where connection and churches come into play. We've got to be brave enough to listen to each other's stories, to hear them, to do the ahas at the right place or at a place, to let them know we're listening, we're getting you, we're hearing it, we're walking with you, shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm. Physical, 15 minutes, physical. Grievers can become very sick. Immunity's lower because cortisol, which is your stress hormone, is flooding. Body temps can even be lower on grievers. We've got to get really, really, really intentional about taking care of our bodies. With my baby cancer, I put together a breast cancer support group immediately. And as I looked around the table, filled with clients and friends, every person at that table, this is not research-based, I'm just talking about at my table, one group. Every person at that table had a traumatic event in their lives. Every person at that table had a traumatic event in their lives. Physical. The number one thing I want to encourage everyone to do, particularly if you have children, but even if you're by yourself, is to develop predictability with your life. Everything about grief feels chaotic. Somebody say truth, isn't that right?
Yes.
When we get anxious or headed, everything feels, waking up in the morning feels chaotic. It's like, I don't remember even how to get out of bed. And I remember for months, what am I saying? For years, he still does it occasionally. I feel like the Lord is just getting me out of bed. I feel like I sit on the side of the bed and I feel like I wait for him to put spiritual braces on my knees. And it's just, come on, daughter, we got work to do today. You're going to do this. We're going to walk it again. We're going to walk it again. Develop some predictability. Eating is a chore. That's why we as people take food in. Eating is hard. But now more than ever, grievers have got to get serious. People in anxiety, I'm doing both. Anxiety, so my cancer journey and my grief journey. Serious about eating. You got to eat protein. I started drinking protein drinks. Protein is going to help your body heal. But eat something regularly. You got to eat. We got to get nourishment to our bodies. Sleeping. I have hardly worked with any griever ever that sleep was not problematic. Going to sleep and particularly staying asleep. There's something about our body's rhythm that people in grief and or anxiety wake up between 2:30 and 3 full of anxiety. There's something about the body rhythm of that, if they can go to sleep at all. We've got to get really serious about sleep predictability. I recommend, and this is all chapter 7 of Scarred Hope, but I recommend starting bedtime routine an hour out. I mean, this is with intentionality. It will never be, oh my goodness, I slept great last night and I did nothing. It's never going to be an accident if you're in anxiety and grief. It's with great intention. That's why the Lord calls us into peace. And I'll do this more the next session, Beverly, don't get ahead of yourself. But I believe in grief, we have to fight for peace. We have to fight for joy. We have to fight for the promises. The Holy Spirit already has put them in us. We've got to quiet our own fears so that his peace and his joy and his kindness can be louder and come to the front, particularly at bedtime. Do something pleasing, a smell at bedtime, lavender, warm baths and showers. Lots of research around how those are so helpful in that hour before. This was one of my husband was saying in his room, he would be laughing out loud, but no blue screen, no television, no phone, no iPad at bedtime. Find something else to read. Now, this is me at bedtime, okay? This is me. I cannot read my Bible at bedtime. It wires me up. I mean, like I want to take notes, I want to write, I want to pen to underline. I quote verses to go to sleep, but I don't read my Bible. And if that works for you, that's great. I'm just giving you permission for it not to be you. If it doesn't, I read my Bible first thing in the morning. But for me, I read something boring. I read, not really, yeah, I guess. I read something very, very predictable. I read something that's not a page turner. I read something that's not like, I wonder what's going to happen next. Like right now, I'm reading the Anne of Green Gables books. It's really true. I'm reading them. It's predictable. I know what's going to happen. I know it's going to end well. I know they're going to get together. You know what I mean? Read something predictable that you know. And the third time I drop the book, I turn the lamp off. But it's knowing what works for you. I'll give you some other techniques in just a minute. Exercise is super important for people in anxiety. And you're like, really? I told my husband the other day, you know the hardest part about exercise? And he said, what? I said, putting my shoes on, just deciding I'm going to do it. Oh, but it brings up all serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, all those good feels, and it quiets your cortisol. Whether in anxiety or whether in grief or in both, exercise is essential. Now, from totally a physical standpoint, what the doctors recommend is exercise more days a week than you don't. From a grief standpoint and anxiety standpoint, they say 30 minutes every day. Heart rate up, 30 minutes. Picturing it. Sometimes I live in a small community. I live in Decatur, Texas. We're a town of maybe 8,000. We've got a large county, got probably 75,000 in the county, but we're a small little community. I know most of the people. And so I put headsets on so that, and I don't even always have anything on it. I'm not listening to music. I'm just giving the signal, don't want to talk. You know, I've just got a headset on, so I don't stop. I just go. But there's something beautiful about getting your heart rate up and picturing all that stress just being left on the road, all that stress just melting away. Children, take them outside, let them play hard. Children are going to work it out. Water. Because of the cortisol, which is your stress hormone, I think I've already said that, the buildup. Water is going to help you detox. The general rule of thumb for water is half your body weight in ounces. So let's do the math easy. If you weigh 150, that'd be 75 ounces of water a day. If that's not a set rule, it's just the goal. You're going to drink tons of water. Tears, let's address that. I think this is such a miracle of the Lord. The tears of grief do not contain the same biology, chemistry as any other tears. The tears of grief contain cortisol. They contain your stress hormones, and they are letting it out of your body. Give yourself permission to cry. Now, typically right here, I get asked, do we cry in front of our children? Yes. And you tell them that you're okay while you're crying. Mommy's okay. This is just what we do. This is what mommy does when we're sad. I don't think it's okay to throw big fits in front of your children. And I threw some pretty big fits after Jenny died. I mean, curled up on the floor, fetal position, moaning. I didn't do that in front of Philea. But it's okay if she walked in and caught me. Because what I'm doing is modeling. This is really hard because it's hard for her too. Children frequently do what we call they become parentified, meaning they start taking care of the parents. And in one of our grief rooms, we have a big elephant. It's a jungle room. And we tell those kids, sometimes you don't get to talk about your story at school. Sometimes you don't get to talk about your story at church. Sometimes you don't want to talk about your story at home because it makes mommy and daddy cry. But in this room, we get to talk about your story. Your elephant's safe in here. And I think that's A-okay for us to surround our children with other adults that tell them, you can tell the story here. You can be with this. You can do this. Now, I want to go over a couple of things with you, and that is some anti-anxiety. These are things that work in grief. Grievers sigh and yawn all the time, and we give ourselves permission to do that. Not only did I sigh, but I would do this. I mean, I'm talking about repetitively after Jenny died. Big sigh. And reminding myself, okay, then keep walking. Okay. You see that exhale in sighs and in yawns turn off the stress response. For just a second, the cortisol stops. It's gone. Matt Redman has in 2 of his songs written about the time Jenny died, probably right before. 2 of his songs, he has written the same line. I'm going to breathe in your grace so I can breathe out your praise. And frequently when I'm in deep, deep breath mode, I picture that grace coming in, praise coming out. There's a method of breathing that we teach our grievers, and there's several that are like this. It's just one that I use. And I'm listening. I just finished yesterday on the drive down listening to a book called Everyday Trauma, and she did the exact same thing. We've learned this technique of breathing from Navy SEALs. The deal with it is you have to practice it all the time so that when you need it, it feels familiar. Does that make sense? You have to practice it when you don't need it so that when you do, your body knows what to do. And it's called box breathing. Maybe already be familiar with it. When I do this, I put both feet on the ground and I want to feel my feet to start with. I feel them. I pay attention. You're grounded. That gets you really present. You're going to go in for 4. We hold it for 4. We go out with noise for 4. You hold it for 4. In for 4, hold, out, in. I've changed this the last few weeks. We just did some grief work at a school district next to us. We had a 2nd grader get killed accidentally at a quinceañera in front of her friends and family. And so we went in there and we were teaching the children this. And one of my colleagues is an expert in children's anxiety. And she taught us the exhale needs to be a couple of seconds longer. Let's practice this. Let's do 3 sets right now. Go in with me. Doesn't matter, nose or mouth. We don't, on the exhale, it's going to be nose and mouth, but the inhale doesn't matter. Let's go in for 4. Here we go. Hold it. Out with noise. Hold it. Going to do another set in. Hold. Out with noise. Hold. Let's do one more time. In. Hold. Out. And hold. And every time I finish, I do this in sessions all the time with clients. I just want to sit in silence for a minute. Something about getting in touch with our own breathing that feels so sacred. Picturing the Holy Spirit coming in, inviting him in. And we're just going to hold it. We teach our children this. When we get in the car, maybe at the end of the day, we have our families say, I feel like you're really anxious when you're getting in the car. Let's practice our breathing real quick. Mom's driving. but she's going to do it. Here we go. Let's go in. Sitting down for dinner. Let's go in. Mom may say, I'm feeling anxious right now because you're being a toot. Let's do some breathing. I'm going to do some breathing for a minute. I invite you to do it with me. But we're modeling. We're modeling how to step in and how to own that and how to be with that. How to claim those things. All right, 1 minute. 1 minute left. There's a little bit more I want to teach you, but we got the rest of the day. Is there anybody, you have a thought or a question? Okay, back over there, I laid out some of my resources. Those are not for sale, but you are welcome to take a look at those. That little bitty book, the turquoise one closest to me, is for adults. The other ones are workbooks for children. There's a dark blue one that's called No More Worries. So it's a great book for children and anxiety. It's a little workbook that mommies and children can do together. These are the resources we're giving out to our 200 families on the wait list. Come pick up a book from us till we can get your kid in. We want you to do that. My favorite grief book for children that's on that resource page of yours is called The Invisible String. The principle of that book is that the relationship, now this is not the language of the book, this is the principle of the book. The relationship does not die because the person did. Your love does not die. And it's okay to still love. Oh. And because we love so hard, could it be? We're going to grieve hard. One of my other grief therapists, not the one I was talking about a minute ago, but he taught me, he said, instead of saying, I'm grieving Jenny hard today, what if you started saying, I'm loving Jenny hard today? What if you started saying, I'm just loving her? And that was such a switch in my own spirit. And it was such a switch for my clients with that. And such a switch for our little children with that, to learn your love isn't going to die just because the person did. And could it be, I'm just going to pose this and then we're going to end and we're going to go do praise and worship, but could it be that because as believers in the Lord Jesus and Holy Spirit empowered and indwelled, we're going to love harder than other people? Do you agree with that? We have permission. We are told to love people hard. So could it be we're going to grieve hard? And could it be it's all the more important for those of us who follow the steps of Jesus to do this work so that we don't live in fear and anxiety forever, but rather we fight for peace and we fight for joy and we fight to quiet the stuff in us. It doesn't mean that we don't grieve. In fact, the tagline of this next session is going to be that grief and joy can hold hands. And I do believe that. Got to give ourselves permission to experience joy. And we're going to talk more about the next time. I'm so glad y'all were in here. Thank you so much for being here and being brave. Talk about a hard topic. I think it's hard to talk about grief. So I'm grateful. Now, where do we go next?